The first thing Maris Vale noticed about the man standing in front of her desk was that he did not look afraid enough. Most people did. They came into the top floor of Vale Meridian Freight with their shoulders tight and their voices polished thigh-in, because 82 stories above the Detroit River, with Canada glittering beyond the glass and half the city's shipping contracts hanging from her signature, Maris had a way of making grown executives remember every mistake they had ever made. This man, though, only stood quietly with a thrift store overcoat folded over one arm and a paper resume held in both hands, as if he were waiting outside a principal's office instead of interviewing with one of the most feared logistics CEOs in North America. His shoes were clean, but worn down at the heels. His navy suit had been altered by someone who knew effort better than tailoring. A narrow red scratch crossed one knuckle, and a small girl's purple hair tie circled his wrist like a promise he had forgotten to remove. Caleb Mercer, Maris read from the page, letting her voice turn cold. 40 years old. Chauffeur experience, warehouse dispatch, private security consulting. Then nothing clear for 7 years. No corporate references I can verify. No military commendations. No executive protection certification. And yet my staff sent you up here. She looked past him toward her assistant, Gail, who stood stiffly beside the door with the apologetic expression of a woman who had already survived 3 resignations that month. He passed the driving test, Gail whispered, and he has a clean background report. Maris gave a humorless laugh. A clean report usually means a boring man or a good liar. Caleb lowered his eyes, not in fear, but in the practiced way of a man who had decided that humility was cheaper than trouble. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly, Ms. Vale. I'm asking for a chance to work. His voice was low and plain, almost tired. It carried no plea, and that irritated her more than begging would have. Maris tapped the resume with one manicured nail. You understand this is not a taxi job. I don't need somebody to open doors and hum along to oldies radio. I have angry union reps, corporate spies, activist investors, hostile buyers, and competitors who would celebrate if my brake lines failed on I-75. The last man in this position was a former Marine with a neck like a fire hydrant. He lasted 9 days. I last, Caleb said. Nothing more. The simplicity of it made the office fall silent for half a breath. Maris leaned back and studied him again. She had built her company by recognizing leverage, and she could smell need on people the way a storm smells iron in the air. You have a child, she said, glancing at the hair tie. Caleb's hand closed slightly around the wrist. A daughter, Hazel. She's 7. And you need benefits. Yes, ma'am. You need a W-2. His gaze moved to the window, then back. Yes. What he did not say was that 2 weeks earlier, in a family courtroom with cracked benches and fluorescent lights, Judge Renee Kessler had told him money meant nothing if it could not be explained. His ex-wife, Lenora, had arrived in pearls with her new husband, Preston Avery, a software investor who smiled like a man accustomed to purchasing outcomes. Their attorney had described Caleb as unstable, irregular, shadowy, a man with no normal employer and no clear schedule, a dangerous mystery wrapped in a father's sweatshirt. Caleb could have made half the courthouse remember favors they owed him. He could have ruined Preston's company before lunch and made Lenora's lawyer change professions by dinner. But Hazel had been sitting beside him, swinging her legs in shoes with tiny stars on the toes, trusting him to be the kind of man he told her to become. So Caleb had nodded when the judge demanded ordinary proof of ordinary life. A paycheck, insurance, a schedule, something stamped, taxable, boring, and legitimate. Now Maris Vale looked at him and saw only a desperate father she could own cheaply. $42,000 a year, she said. On call, no overtime. You drive, carry, wait, keep your mouth shut, and do exactly as instructed. You do not advise me, correct me, question my routes, speak to clients, or develop opinions in my presence. If I say turn left into the river, your first response should be to ask which dock. Gail's face tightened, but Caleb only nodded. Understood. Maris smiled then, a thin, victorious line. And lose that funeral tie. It makes you look like you borrowed clothes from a man who died broke. Caleb accepted the badge, the insult, and the job without blinking. When he left the office, Maris turned back toward the skyline, pleased with herself. She believed she had found a man soft enough to absorb her cruelty and needy enough not to quit. In the elevator, Caleb waited until the doors closed, then took out a battered phone that was not the one he used for school reminders, custody appointments, and pediatric dentist calls. "Silas," he said when the line clicked alive. "I need someone to find out what kind of coffee Maris Vale drinks and how hot she likes it." A rough voice on the other end hesitated. "That the freight queen?" "That's my employer." "Boss, the Windsor boys are asking about the East Terminal again." Caleb looked at his own reflection in the brushed steel, at the cheap suit and tired eyes he had chosen as armor. "Tell them the river belongs to people who respect boundaries. Close the gambling rooms on Verner, move the trucks before midnight, and nobody touches anything connected to Vale Meridian unless I say it." And if they already did? Caleb's expression did not change. Then teach them the difference between a warning and a funeral. By the end of the first month, Maris considered Caleb Mercer the most useful inconvenience she had ever hired. He was always present and never in the way. At 6:30 each morning, the black Lincoln Navigator waited beneath the private canopy with the rear cabin warmed exactly to 72 degrees, and a paper cup of almond milk cappuccino nestled into the holder, hot enough to satisfy her and never hot enough to burn. He kept an extra umbrella tucked behind the passenger seat, remembered which heels hurt her ankle after long meetings, learned the back entrances to every courthouse, hotel, restaurant, and industrial office from Detroit to Grand Rapids, and never once allowed annoyance to show on his face. Maris repaid that competence with contempt. She blamed him for ice storms, late bridges, construction barrels, traffic lights, weak coffee, loud reporters, bad quarterly numbers, and a flight delay in Atlanta he could not possibly have caused. When a shareholder call went badly, she snapped the lid off her pen and threw it at the partition. Ink splattered across the sleeve of his only decent shirt, and he merely said, "I'll have it cleaned." When she made him stand outside a charity gala for 3 hours in February sleet because she disliked the look of the valet line, he kept his hands folded in front of him while freezing rain ran from his hair into his collar. "You know," she told him one night, as he held the door for her outside the Townsend Hotel, "there are men who would find this humiliating." Caleb's answer was quiet. "There are things worse than being underestimated." She rolled her eyes and slid into the rear seat, unaware that the phone in his coat pocket held messages from men who never used his name in public, men who called him Harbor because everything valuable, illegal, fragile, or dangerous in southeastern Michigan seemed to pass through his permission sooner or later. He had not inherited an empire in the old romantic sense. He had taken a landscape of violent crews, corrupt brokers, debt traps, stolen cargo rings, crooked lenders, and street corner kings, and forced it into silence by offering 2 options: order or extinction. To the public, he had been a warehouse contractor, then nothing, then a single father in a small rented house with a porch light that flickered in the wind. To the men who ran contraband through rail yards, bribed inspectors, stripped freight containers, and leaned on weak people for cash. Caleb Mercer was the last voice they heard before their lives changed. But with Hazel, he was the man who burned pancakes on Saturdays, braided hair badly, checked spelling homework, and sat awake with the hallway light on when nightmares visited. Every choice he made now passed through that narrow doorway. Could Hazel know about it? Could Hazel live with it? Could Hazel still look at him the same way? The answer had forced him into Maris Vale's service more effectively than any threat could have done. Hazel liked knowing her father had a real office lady boss. She packed him granola bars in his glove box and once taped a note to the dashboard that read, "Be nice even when people are grumpy, Daddy." Caleb kept it folded behind his license. On a damp Thursday morning, after dropping Hazel at St. Bridget's Academy with her science fair poster balanced carefully under one arm, he found Maris already waiting at the curb outside Vale Meridian, her face sharpened by anger and her phone clutched in one white-knuckled hand. "Riverfront Club," she ordered as she stepped in. "And do not take Jefferson. Some idiot on my board leaked details of the Toledo terminal vote, and Warren Pike thinks that means I'm weak." Caleb's eyes lifted briefly to the mirror. Warren Pike was not merely a developer, though business magazines preferred that cleaner word. He specialized in distressed industrial land, which meant he acquired property after fires, foreclosures, mysterious zoning pressure, or sudden acts of fear. In the darker economy, Pike was known for hiring a private outfit called Stone Chapel, ex-contractors who made problems disappear without leaving invoices behind. For 6 months, he had been trying to force Maris to sell Vale Meridian's controlling stake in the old Toledo River Terminal, a neglected but strategically priceless hub connecting rail, lake freight, and trucking lanes. Maris saw the terminal as leverage. Pike saw it as the missing tooth in a mouth he intended to own. "That meeting should include counsel and security," Caleb said. It was the first advice he had offered her. Maris looked up from her phone as if the floor mat had spoken. "I'm sorry, did I ask for commentary?" "No, ma'am." "Then drive." Her lipstick was the color of a fresh wound, and her voice had the brittle cheer of a woman walking toward a fight she believed she could win because she had never seen the weapons being brought to it. Caleb turned onto Woodward, one hand steady on the wheel, and watched the city move in the glass around them. He could already feel the shape of the trouble. The Riverfront Club had been built in a century when powerful men wanted marble columns to remind the poor that democracy had limits. Maris entered through the front beneath chandeliers and old oil portraits, leaving Caleb beside the Lincoln with the instruction not to wander off like some mall cop. He watched her disappear through the brass doors, then crossed the circle drive and leaned against the cold stone wall with a paper cup in his hand. To anyone passing, he looked like an underpaid driver stealing a moment of warmth. To the 3 men who stepped out of a delivery van near the service entrance, he looked invisible. That was their first mistake. They moved with the practiced rhythm of men who had rehearsed violence together. Not street toughs, but hired pressure. Their coats heavy in the wrong places. Their eyes never resting long enough to be casual. Caleb set his coffee on the wall and followed them down a narrow side passage where melting snow had turned black along the curb. Inside the club, Maris was sitting opposite Warren Pike in a private dining room lined with dark walnut and framed photographs of governors, judges, and auto executives, now dead enough to seem respectable. Pike was in his late 60s, silver-haired, heavy-jawed, and calm in the way of men who had never been hit by consequences. "Maris, you are brilliant," he said, spreading his hands. "But brilliant people sometimes mistake stubbornness for strategy. Sell me Toledo. Take the money. Keep your pretty tower and your magazine covers. The terminal is not for sale. Everything is for sale. Not to you." Pike's smile thinned. "There are kinds of pressure you have not experienced." She laughed at him. It was a good laugh, sharp and expensive, and it would have been effective in a boardroom. Are you threatening me before lunch, Warren? I am educating you. He glanced at his watch, waiting for a text that would tell him the private corridor was secure, that his men had blocked the service exit, that a billionaire CEO could be escorted into a freight elevator and frightened badly enough to sign something she would later pretend was voluntary. The text did not come. In the alley behind the club, Caleb had taken the first man by the wrist before the man knew he had lost the fight, folded him into the brick with a sound like a dropped melon, and caught the second by the collar as he reached beneath his coat. The third managed to pull a knife. Caleb looked almost regretful. Don't, he said. The man lunged anyway. 4 seconds later, he was on his knees in the dirty snow, both hands shaking around a broken wrist, his face pressed close to the gutter. Caleb crouched beside him and spoke softly enough that the security camera above the door would record only shapes. Go back to Pike and tell him the Toledo terminal has shade over it now, the man groaned. Who are you? Caleb wiped his knuckles on the fallen man's coat and looked toward the river, where winter light lay flat and silver on the water. Someone who was trying very hard to remain employed. When Maris came out 20 minutes later, she was furious and alive. Pike had ended the meeting abruptly after receiving a call that turned his face the color of wet cement, and though she did not know why, she took his retreat as proof of her superiority. He folded, she said, tossing her leather portfolio at Caleb's chest. He caught it without looking down. That old jackal folded right in front of me. I told you lawyers were enough. Yes, ma'am. She paused, narrowing her eyes. What happened to your hand? Caleb glanced at the reopened cut across his knuckle. Caught it on the door. Try not to bleed on the steering wheel. It's leased. I'll be careful. He opened her door. As she ducked into the warm leather cabin, she wrinkled her nose. And why do you smell like alley water? Caleb closed the door gently, walked around to the driver's side, and allowed himself one long breath before he got in. In the rearview mirror, Maris was already typing, already victorious in a story she did not understand. He drove her back through the gray afternoon while his phone buzzed once in his pocket. The message from Silas was short. Pike did not listen. The second attempt came on a night when the city seemed to be holding its breath. A lake-effect storm had turned the streets glossy. The wind shoved sleet sideways through the loading bays, and even the river looked tired beneath the black bridges. Maris had spent 14 hours in negotiations over the Toledo terminal, then emerged from her office with the wild brightness she got when exhaustion became arrogance. We're going down there, she said. Caleb looked up from the schedule he was revising near Gail's desk. To Toledo? To the terminal. Tonight. Gail, who had learned to fear Maris less and weather reports more, whispered, Ms. Vale, the roads. The board thinks I don't know my own asset. Pike thinks he can scare me away from it. I want to see the South Pier, the Crane Line, and the rail spur before tomorrow morning's vote. Caleb stood very still. That property is dark after 9. The guard contractor was changed last week, which is why I'm going without alerting anyone. That is not wise. Maris turned on him slowly. Around them, the executive floor seemed to quiet. Your job is not wisdom, Mr. Mercer. Your job is transportation. I understand you need this position for your little custody problem, so I'm going to be generous and assume you briefly forgot your place. The mention of Hazel landed exactly where she intended it to land. Gail looked away. Caleb's jaw tightened once, then eased. I'll bring the car around. For the first hour of the drive south, Maris worked in silence, lit by the glow of her tablet, while Caleb watched weather, traffic, and the dark silhouettes of trucks cutting through sleet. He did not call Silas, not yet. Part of him still hoped Maris might see the empty highway, the closing warehouses, the frozen rain needling the windshield, and change her mind. She did not. The Toledo terminal sprawled along the river like the skeleton of an empire nobody had buried properly. Rusted cranes, stacked containers, chain-link fence patched with new locks, old sodium lights humming against the sleet. Caleb stopped the Lincoln near the administrative office, but the building was dark. Too dark. "Stay in the car," he said. Maris opened her door. "I beg your pardon?" "Please." Something in that word should have reached her. It almost did. Then her pride stiffened her spine, and she stepped into the storm. "I am not taking orders from my driver." Her heels struck the wet concrete as she walked toward the pier. Caleb got out after her, leaving the engine running. The wind off the river carried the metallic smell of old water, oil, and snow. Somewhere beyond the container stacks, a gate clanged once, then again. Headlights flared to life in 3 different directions, hard white beams cutting through the sleet. 2 black pickups and a dark panel van rolled from behind the containers, boxing the Lincoln against the riverside. Maris stopped. For the first time since Caleb had met her, she had no insult ready. Men stepped out into the lights, 6 of them, dressed in dark rain gear over body armor, faces covered to the cheekbones, weapons held low but not hidden. A 7th man emerged from the van carrying a folder sealed in plastic. He was lean, bald, and pale, with the mild expression of an accountant who had misplaced compassion years ago. "Ms. Vale," he called over the wind. "Mr. Pike apologizes for not attending. He thought you might be more reasonable without an audience." Maris backed toward the Lincoln, her breath short. "You have no idea who you're threatening." The bald man smiled. "We know exactly. Rich widow's daughter, mean reputation, good lawyers, bad habits, no husband, no children, no one waiting up who can't be paid off." The words struck her strangely. No children, no one waiting up. For half a second, her eyes flicked toward Caleb, who had moved beside her with maddening calm. The bald man lifted the folder. "You sign the emergency transfer, record a brief statement about selling under strategic pressure, and tomorrow you announce a leave of absence. After that, the storm handles the rest. People slip on wet piers." Maris reached for her phone, but one of the men raised his weapon. "Drop it!" The phone hit the concrete and skidded into a puddle. Her entire life had been made of command, and now command had vanished. She could buy buildings, elections, lawyers, loyalty, silence. She could not buy one more breath if the man in front of her decided she had run out. "Caleb?" she whispered, and it was the first time she had said his name without contempt. He stepped in front of her, not dramatically, not with a speech, just one smooth step, placing his body between Maris Vale and the weapon pointed at her heart. The posture changed first. The mild bend of the shoulders disappeared. The tired driver vanished as if someone had wiped condensation from glass. What remained was a man the dark seemed to recognize. "Take your men," Caleb said, "and leave the terminal." The bald man stared through the sleet. "Move aside." "No." One of the armed men laughed uneasily. "Who's this? Her chauffeur?" Caleb looked at him, and the laugh died unfinished. The bald man took a closer look. Recognition moved across his face slowly, then all at once, like a match finding gas. "Mercer," he said, but not as a name, as a warning. 2 of the men shifted backward. Maris heard one whisper, "Harbor." Caleb removed his gloves and folded them with care. "Warren Pike was told." The bald man swallowed. "We were told you were out. We were told you went civilian." "I am civilian tonight." Caleb glanced toward the Lincoln, where Hazel's note was tucked behind the license in the glove box. "That is the mercy you have left." The man with the folder reached for his sidearm. Caleb moved. Maris would later remember it in fragments, never as a whole. A hand turning, a shoulder dropping, the folder spinning into the sleet, a weapon knocked away before it fully rose, a sharp crack that might have been bone or plastic or thunder. Caleb did not fight like the men in movies. He wasted nothing. He used elbows, knees, balance, angles, the wet ground, the open door of the van, the hesitation that fear created. One man fired into the dark and shattered a terminal light. Sparks fell like orange rain. Another charged and hit the concrete so hard he slid under the pickup. Caleb took a pistol from someone without seeming to hurry, struck the weapon empty, and sent it skittering into the river. There was violence, yes, sudden and terrible, but what froze Maris was the restraint inside it. He was not raging. He was measuring, choosing, ending each threat, and moving on. Within a minute, perhaps less, the men who had surrounded her were down, disarmed, groaning, crawling, or staring at him with the helpless awe of people who had discovered the weather itself had taken sides. The bald man lay on his back in the sleet, blood on his lip, one hand raised. "Please," he rasped. Caleb crouched beside him. "Tell Pike he is out of freight, out of river, out of chances. Tell him if he speaks Maris Vale's name again, he will spend the rest of his life wishing he had respected the word no." Then Caleb stood, turned, and walked back to Maris. She was sitting against the rear tire of the Lincoln without remembering how she had gotten there. Her coat was soaked. Her hands shook so violently she could not close them. The world she understood had split open, and behind it stood her underpaid driver, breathing calmly in the sleet while armed men whimpered around him. Caleb reached toward her, and she flinched so hard her shoulder struck the car. Something changed in his face then. Not hurt exactly, but a shadow of it. He withdrew his hand slowly, reached into his coat, and took out a clean cotton handkerchief folded into a square. "There's mud on your cheek," he said. His voice had returned to the one she knew, quiet and almost deferential. "May I?" She nodded because words were beyond her. He wiped the mud away gently, as if she were Hazel waking from a fever instead of the woman who had mocked him for needing a paycheck. Then he opened the rear door. "Please get in, Ms. Vale. You're cold." She crawled into the seat, numb and shivering, and watched through the rain-streaked window as he made 2 phone calls. The first lasted 15 seconds. "South Pier, 6 men alive. No police until morning. Make sure they remember why." The second was softer. "Mrs. Alvarez? It's Caleb. I'm sorry to call late. Hazel still asleep? Thank you. I may be another hour. Tell her I'll make waffles before school." That was the call that broke something in Maris. Not the fighting, not the fear, not even the name Harbor, which she had heard once at a political dinner when a prosecutor lowered his voice and said there were some men. Smart people did not investigate without federal witness protection already arranged. It was the waffles. It was the reminder that this man she had treated like an object had a child waiting in a small, warm house, a child who believed his mourning mattered, a child for whom he was trying to become legal, ordinary, safe. The drive back to Detroit stretched through darkness and sleet, the heater humming softly, the city lights blurred ahead. Maris sat curled in the far corner of the back seat, staring at Caleb's profile. His shirt was torn at the collar. One knuckle had swollen. A thin line of blood dried near his ear. He drove at the speed limit. That absurd detail nearly made her laugh, then nearly made her cry. At the tower, he came around to open her door as always. She stepped out beneath the canopy and found that her legs could hold her only if she gripped the doorframe. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked. The question left her naked, stripped of money, position, and pride. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. No. Because I know? Because Hazel thinks I work for you. Maris swallowed. What are you? He glanced up at the tower, at the lit windows where people worked late because she demanded impossible things and rewarded exhaustion with more impossible things. A father trying to pass a custody review. That's not an answer. It's the only one that still matters. He closed the car door. Your board vote is at 9. I'll be downstairs at 7:30. Then he drove away, leaving Maris Vale under the polished lights of her own building, feeling for the first time in years that she owned nothing solid at all. Morning arrived with a hard blue sky and a city polished clean by the storm. Maris did not sleep. She walked through her penthouse until dawn, seeing in every reflection the faces of men at the terminal and Caleb's quiet hand wiping mud from her cheek. By 7, she had read everything she could find that was not rumor scrubbed by fear. Caleb Mercer appeared in public records as a widower, then not, because Lenora had left rather than died. As a contractor, then not, because companies dissolved after doing business with him. As a man with no criminal convictions, no debt, no property in his own name, and no explanation for why a retired federal investigator had once requested sealed protection after asking too many questions about harbor. There were no photographs beyond school fundraisers and a grainy image from a charity fishing tournament where he stood behind Hazel holding a paper plate of watermelon. That image unsettled her most. He looked happy in it. Not powerful, not dangerous, just present. At 7:30, the Lincoln waited below. Caleb stood beside it wearing a different cheap suit, charcoal this time, with the same thrift store overcoat and the same unreadable calm. Maris approached slowly. For once, he opened the door and she did not get in immediately. Your hand, she said. It's fine. I asked Gail to add medical coverage effective retroactively from your start date. You didn't have to. Yes, she said, surprising herself. I did. In the office, chaos had already gathered. Warren Pike had not retreated after Toledo. Men like him mistook survival for permission. By 8:15, Gail met Maris at the elevator with a face the color of paper. He's in the boardroom. Who? Pike, with attorneys and security I don't recognize. They disabled the floor cameras. I tried building security, but nobody is answering. Maris felt the old panic try to rise, but beneath it came something stranger. Shame. A month ago, she would have walked in furious and alone. Certain force of personality could stop anything. Now she looked at Caleb. He stood near the elevator bank holding her cappuccino in a cardboard tray. Stay behind me, he said. This time she did. The boardroom doors stood open. Warren Pike occupied her chair at the head of the long glass table, his overcoat draped over the back as though he had already moved in. 4 men stood along the wall, not the same ones from Toledo, but the same type, hard-eyed and broad under their jackets. 2 lawyers sat with stacks of documents and the brittle posture of professionals pretending they did not know they were accomplices. Pike smiled when Maris entered. The smile faltered when Caleb followed. Maris, Pike said. Difficult night? She straightened. Get out of my chair. Not until you sign. There will be no sale. There will be if you want to walk out of this building with your reputation intact. His gaze slid to Caleb. And you brought the driver. How sweet. One of the men by the wall moved forward. Caleb set the coffee tray on the credenza. Don't! The man ignored him. He reached for Caleb's shoulder, perhaps intending to shove him aside, perhaps intending worse. Caleb caught the hand and held it with almost casual pressure. The man's knees bent as pain overtook pride. Caleb leaned close and said something no one else heard. The man went pale and backed away as soon as Caleb released him. Pike's expression hardened. I don't know what happened at my terminal last night, but I know one man doesn't stop business. You don't have business anymore, Caleb said. The room quieted. He took a phone from his pocket and placed it on the table. At 4 this morning, your lenders received documentation tying Stone Chapel to extortion, arson, and attempted kidnapping. At 5, your Nevada training property burned clean of records before state police arrived. At 6, 3 of your silent partners decided retirement was healthier than loyalty. At 7, the debt you used to buy pressure was purchased through a trust that answers to me. Pike stared at him. You're bluffing. Caleb slid the phone across the table. The screen showed account freezes, emergency filings, messages from bankers who had sounded confident yesterday and terrified before breakfast. Pike's face sagged, then twisted. Who do you think you are? Caleb looked tired then, not from fear but from the weight of having to become this man in front of witnesses. Someone who told you no. One of the lawyers stood abruptly. Mr. Pike, I believe our firm must withdraw from representation pending review. The other lawyer gathered documents so quickly half of them fell. The men by the wall did not reach for weapons. They had recognized the silence in Caleb's voice, and recognition had made them wise. Pike rose, trembling with fury, but Caleb stepped closer, and the older man stopped. You used fear on dock workers, widows, small trucking families, and a woman who thought being cruel made her safe, Caleb said. You mistook all of them for isolated people. That was your mistake. Leave Michigan. Pay every debt you owe to the families you squeezed. And thank God my daughter still believes in good mornings. Pike left without another word. His men followed. His lawyers nearly ran. When the doors closed, the boardroom seemed to exhale. Gail began to cry quietly near the wall. Maris stood beside her own chair, looking at Caleb as if seeing not a monster and not a servant, but a man carrying 2 lives that could not coexist forever. He picked up the coffee and handed it to her. It may be a little cool, he said. Maris took it with both hands. Caleb, he waited. I am sorry. The words were smaller than the damage, but they were honest. And for Maris Vale, that made them costly. Caleb nodded once. 9 o'clock vote, he said. You should sit down. The custody hearing took place 3 weeks later in a county courthouse that smelled of floor wax, old paper, and wet wool coats. Caleb arrived early with Hazel's backpack over one shoulder and her hand tucked inside his. She wore a yellow sweater because she said judges probably liked sunny colors, and she had drawn a picture for him during breakfast, a stick-figure daddy driving a very long black car with a tiny boss lady in the back and a smiling girl in the front, even though Caleb had explained children were not allowed in the company vehicle. It's pretend, Hazel told him solemnly. Pretend has better rules. He folded the drawing carefully and put it in his inside pocket. Across the courtroom, Lenora sat with Preston Avery and 2 attorneys whose shoes shone brighter than their compassion. Lenora looked beautiful in the distant way she had always preferred, every curl placed, every jewel chosen to communicate that she had ascended beyond the life she once shared with Caleb. She loved Hazel in her way, he knew that. But she loved being seen as the better parent almost as much. And Preston loved winning even more. When Judge Kessler entered, everyone rose. She was a compact woman with silver hair cut to her jaw and a reputation for smelling deception before lawyers finished introducing it. Mr. Mercer, she said after reviewing the file, at our last conference, this court made clear that unexplained income and an irregular schedule were serious concerns. Your former spouse has provided evidence of a stable household, private tutoring options, and health coverage through Mr. Avery's firm. What have you provided? Caleb's attorney, a weary legal aid lawyer named Rosalind Tate, began to stand, but the rear doors opened before she could speak. Maris Vale entered the courtroom without entourage, wearing a dark blue suit, low heels, and no jewelry except a watch. The room recognized her in waves. A clerk whispered. One of Lenora's attorneys turned around and forgot to close his mouth. Even Judge Kessler paused. Maris walked to the gate with a folder in hand. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. I am Maris Vale, Chief Executive of Vale Meridian Freight. I employ Mr. Mercer. Lenora's lips parted in disbelief. Preston leaned toward his attorney, suddenly less smug. Judge Kessler studied Maris over her glasses. This is unusual, Ms. Vale. Yes, Your Honor. So is the man. Caleb looked down. Hazel looked up at Maris and waved a little because children forgive importance before adults do. Maris's face softened, just for a second, and she waved back. Then she took the stand. Mr. Mercer has been employed by my company as an executive driver and protection specialist. His payroll records, benefits enrollment, schedule documentation, and employment guarantee are in this folder. His position is permanent for as long as he wishes to hold it. Lenora's attorney rose. Your Honor, a billionaire employer appearing personally does not change the concerns regarding Mr. Mercer's past. No, Maris said, turning toward him, but it speaks to his present. The judge allowed her to continue. Maris placed her hands in her lap, and for once she did not sound like she was addressing shareholders, competitors, or subordinates. She sounded like a woman trying to tell the truth without decorating it. I have built a career judging people quickly. I believed Mr. Mercer was ordinary in the ways that made him useful to me. Quiet. Needy. Easy to dismiss. I was wrong about why he was quiet. He is quiet because he has discipline. I was wrong about why he accepted hard treatment. He accepted it because his daughter needed him to endure something unfair without becoming bitter in front of her. I have seen him remain calm under pressure that would break most people in this room. I have seen him put himself between danger and another person without hesitation and without asking to be praised for it. But more importantly, I have seen him take calls from his daughter and become gentle in a way no performance can imitate. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. He had faced armed men with a steadier heartbeat than he had now. He plans his work around school pickup, Maris continued. He keeps granola bars in the glove box because Hazel worries he forgets to eat. He declined a company apartment because his current house is 4 blocks from her school and he did not want to disrupt her mornings. He is not careless. He is not unstable. He is the most reliable man I know. Lenora's attorney tried again. Ms. Vale, with respect, he is your driver. Maris looked at him. The old edge returned, but this time it served something better than pride. No, counselor. He is a father. The job is merely the document this court requested. The room fell quiet enough to hear Hazel's pencil roll off the table. Judge Kessler leaned back, absorbing more than Maris had said aloud. She asked Caleb several questions about schedule, childcare, insurance, school, emergency contacts, and home life. He answered each one plainly. No grand speeches. No attack on Lenora. When the judge asked why he wanted primary custody, he looked at Hazel, then at the bench. Because she wakes up easier when she knows where she is. Because I know which stories help when she misses her mom. Because she asks hard questions at night, and I don't want her asking them to a hallway. Lenora looked away then, and something like grief moved across her face. Perhaps she remembered the years before ambition hardened into performance. Perhaps she remembered Caleb walking Hazel through colic at 3 a.m. while she slept with a pillow over her head. Perhaps she simply realized that winning a child was not the same as loving one well. Judge Kessler gave her ruling after a recess that lasted 20 minutes and felt like 20 years. Primary physical custody would remain with Caleb. Lenora would have generous parenting time and required co-parenting counseling. The court would review employment quarterly for 1 year. This child, the judge said, looking over the bench at both parents, does not need victory from either of you. She needs peace. Hazel did not understand all of it, but she understood enough when Caleb bent down and opened his arms. She ran into them, pressing her face into his neck. He held her there, eyes wet but controlled, one hand spread across the back of her yellow sweater as if keeping the whole world from touching it. Outside, the afternoon had turned clear and cold. The courthouse steps shone with melted snow, and buses sighed along the curb. Lenora passed Caleb without speaking at first, then stopped. Preston waited several feet away, chastened by events he could not buy. "She needs her blue inhaler after gym," Lenora said, not meeting Caleb's eyes. "The school keeps one, but she likes the one with the sticker." Caleb nodded. "I know." Lenora's mouth trembled. "I don't want to lose her." "You won't," he said. There were a dozen cruel answers he could have given, and perhaps she deserved some of them. He gave her none. "But don't make her feel like loving me betrays you." Lenora looked at him then, and for the first time in years, he saw the girl he had once married beneath the woman who had learned to measure life in upgrades. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Caleb did not absolve her. He did not punish her either. "Be there Saturday," he said. "She'll wait by the window." Lenora nodded and walked away. Maris stood near the bottom of the steps beside the Lincoln, hands in her coat pockets, watching with an expression Caleb could not easily read. Hazel skipped ahead to inspect a crust of ice near the curb under Gail's cheerful supervision. For a moment, Caleb and Maris stood alone in the courthouse wind. "You didn't have to come personally," he said. "A letter would have worked." "No," Maris replied. "It would have satisfied the file. It would not have told the truth." He looked toward Hazel, who was laughing because Gail had nearly slipped. "Truth is expensive. I'm learning that." Maris hesitated. "I treated you badly because I thought need made you small." Caleb said nothing. That silence held more mirror than accusation. "I was wrong," she continued. "And not just because of what you can do. I was wrong before I knew any of that. You were patient. I called it weakness. You were careful. I called it dull. You were enduring humiliation for your child, and I mistook that for permission to add more." A gust of cold wind pushed her hair across her cheek. She tucked it back, no longer looking like a woman who owned the skyline, but like someone standing under it, human-sized at last. "I am sorry, Caleb." He accepted the apology with a small nod. "Don't become kind because you're afraid of me." "I'm not afraid of you." He looked at her. She gave a faint, honest smile. "All right, I am. A little, but that isn't why." Hazel ran back then, cheeks pink, and stopped in front of Maris. "Are you my dad's boss?" "I am," Maris said. "Was he good?" Hazel asked with grave seriousness. Maris glanced at Caleb. "Very good." Hazel beamed as if she herself had been complimented. "He makes good waffles too, but sometimes they stick." "That sounds like a serious management issue." "You should give him practice." Caleb coughed once, and Maris almost laughed. It was the first real laugh he had heard from her, low and surprised, without a blade hidden in it. When Hazel climbed into the back seat with her backpack, Maris did not take her usual place immediately. "Does the arrangement continue?" she asked. "Judge checks quarterly," Caleb said. "Hazel likes routine. You still need a driver. I need more than a driver, apparently. You need fewer enemies. Can you help with that? I can help you stop making new ones before breakfast." She deserved that and took it without flinching. "Fair." He opened the rear door for her. She paused before entering. "No more insults about your clothes." "That would be appreciated." No more throwing folders. Also appreciated. And your salary is being corrected to market rate. My attorney will like that. You have an attorney? Caleb's eyes warmed briefly. I have a legal aid lawyer who terrifies me more than most criminals. Maris stepped into the car, and Hazel immediately leaned forward from the far side. Miss Vale, do you like dinosaur facts? Maris, who had negotiated with ministers, senators, billionaires, and men who carried guns in boardrooms, looked helplessly toward Caleb in the mirror. He started the engine. She has several. Hazel took that as permission and began explaining the difference between a brontosaurus and an apatosaurus with the breathless authority of a child who had been waiting all day for a proper audience. Maris listened. Not politely at first, but then genuinely, asking one careful question that made Hazel light up. Caleb drove through downtown Detroit with both hands steady on the wheel, past glass towers, old brick churches, parking lots crusted with snow, and the river flashing between buildings. In the back seat sat the woman who had tried to own him and the child for whom he had allowed himself to be owned. The balance between his two worlds remained fragile. Silas still called. Men still tested boundaries. The river still moved things at night that daylight never admitted. Caleb did not pretend one court ruling had washed him clean, but Hazel's drawing rested inside his jacket. His paycheck would arrive on Friday, and for the first time in a long while, the road ahead did not feel like a lie. At a red light, Maris met his eyes in the mirror, not with fear alone and not with command, but with respect. Caleb gave the smallest nod and looked back to the street. He did not need revenge. He did not need applause. He had kept his daughter's hand in his, kept his temper under lock, and let the truth arrive without shouting. By the time the light changed, Hazel was laughing, Maris was listening, and Caleb Mercer, the most dangerous ordinary father in Michigan, drove on in quiet dignity beneath a winter sky that finally seemed willing to clear. Sometimes the greatest strength hides behind ordinary love. In Caleb Mercer's quiet determination to secure a stable life for his daughter, we see that dignity is not measured by titles, but by the lengths a parent will travel to protect a child's sense of safety. Even after facing contempt from a powerful CEO, Caleb chose patience over pride, action over anger, and integrity over intimidation. His courage reminds us that we do not have to dominate a room to change its temperature. Steady values, spoken softly, can outlast any storm. At the same time, Maris Vale's awakening shows how quickly power can blind us and how humility can reopen our eyes. When she finally recognized Caleb's self-sacrifice, she discovered the deeper success that comes from respecting the humanity in others. The lesson is simple yet profound. Real influence begins the moment we decide to treat every person, driver, executive, or stranger, with the same compassion we hope the world will show our families. Carry that truth into your own life today. If this story moved you, share the moment that touched you most in the comments below, and let's start a conversation about everyday courage. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss another story that proves quiet heroes still walk among us.